When winter came for Evelyn Cross the first time, it buried her husband under 6 feet of frozen ground and left her alone on a Montana ridge with nothing but grief and a vow she carved into her own heart. Never again. Now, 5 years later, while the valley below laughs and feasts through an easy autumn, Evelyn stands in her cabin doorway watching the wrong birds fly south too early, and she knows. Death is coming. This time, she's ready. But when a stranger arrives at her door with secrets in his eyes and the whole town turns savage with hunger, being ready might not be enough. If you're watching from somewhere in this big world, drop your city in the comments below. I want to see just how far this story travels. Hit that like button and settle in, because what happened on that ridge changed everything. The September sun beat down on the Montana ridge with the kind of heat that made promises it couldn't keep. Evelyn Cross stood in her garden, knife in hand, cutting the last of the season's apples into thin, precise slices. Sweat traced lines down her temples, dampening the collar of her faded cotton dress. But she didn't stop. Couldn't stop. Around her, wooden racks stretched in every direction, crowded with drying meat, sliced vegetables, herbs bundled and hanging like strange decorations for a festival no one else was attending. Below, in the valley town of Clements Ridge, she could hear the distant sounds of life continuing as it always had. Laughter from the saloon, the hammer-strike rhythm of the blacksmith, children shouting in the schoolyard. Normal, easy, blind. Evelyn's hands moved with practiced efficiency, each apple slice joining hundreds of others laid out to dry in the relentless sun. Her fingers were stained, her back ached, and she didn't care. The other folks in town had stopped visiting weeks ago. The whispers had started shortly after. Broken, they said. Lost her mind when she lost her husband. Poor thing can't let go. It's been 5 years, for heaven's sake. Let them whisper. Evelyn had learned the hard way that other people's opinions wouldn't keep you alive when the temperature dropped to 20 below and the snow buried your door. Their laughter wouldn't fill your belly when the supply wagons couldn't get through. Their pity wouldn't warm your hands when frostbite came creeping. She straightened, pressing one hand to the small of her back, and surveyed her work. 3 large root cellars, dug deep and reinforced. Enough dried meat to feed 10 people through 4 months. Preserved vegetables, dried fruits, rendered fat, smoked fish from the creek. Firewood stacked 8 feet high against the north wall of the cabin, covered and ready. Extra blankets she'd traded for in Bozeman. Medical supplies, lamp oil, salt, everything she could think of, everything she could afford, everything she could make or grow or preserve. The ridge had taken Thomas from her in the winter of 1873. Pneumonia that started as a cough and ended as a death rattle while the snow piled so high they couldn't get to town for a doctor. She'd held him through that last night, felt his fever burn through her nightgown, listened to his breathing get shallower and shallower until it wasn't there at all. When morning came, she'd wrapped him in their wedding quilt and somehow dragged him outside, but the ground was frozen too hard to dig. She'd kept his body in the barn for 6 weeks until the thaw. 6 weeks of sleeping alone in a cabin that still smelled like sickness. 6 weeks of talking to a corpse wrapped in fabric because the silence was worse. 6 weeks of understanding, with perfect clarity, that the world didn't care if you were ready. After they'd buried Thomas in the spring, Evelyn had made 2 promises. First, she would never be that helpless again. Second, she would never trust an easy season. Now, watching the valley below carry on with its comfortable autumn, she felt that old familiar tingling at the base of her spine. The knowing, the warning that lived in her bones. Something was wrong with this year. The signs were small, easy to miss if you weren't looking. But Evelyn was always looking. The birds had started migrating 3 weeks early. The woolly caterpillars she'd found were almost entirely black. The old-timers said that meant a brutal winter. The squirrels were frantic, their nests twice as large as usual. Even the sky felt different, the light sharper somehow, like the air itself was drawing tight. She'd tried to warn them. In late August, she'd gone to town and mentioned it to Martha Hadley at the general store. Martha had smiled that patient, pitying smile. "Oh, Evelyn, every year you think it's going to be the bad one. The Lord provides, dear. He always has." Evelyn had bought her salt and lamp oil and hadn't said another word. The problem with people, she'd realized, was that they confused luck with providence. They thought because they'd survived before, they'd survive again. They didn't understand that survival was active, not passive. It required seeing what was coming and making hard choices before comfort became a luxury you couldn't afford. She was carrying another basket of sliced apples to the drying racks when she heard the horse. The sound carried clear in the late afternoon air, hooves on the rocky trail that wound up from the valley. Evelyn set down her basket and wiped her hands on her apron, squinting into the lowering sun. A rider. Alone. Coming up the ridge at a steady pace that suggested either confidence or exhaustion. Evelyn's cabin sat a good 3 miles from town, perched on a plateau that offered a clear view of the valley and the mountains beyond. People didn't come up here by accident. The trail was too rough, the climb too steep. If someone was coming, they had a reason. She stepped into the cabin and retrieved the rifle Thomas had taught her to shoot. It was loaded, had been loaded every day for 5 years. She didn't point it at the approaching rider, but she held it ready, angled across her body in a way that made her intentions clear. The rider crested the final rise as the sun touched the western peaks. A man, broad-shouldered and lean, sitting a tired roan mare that looked like she'd covered serious miles. He wore dusty trail clothes, a hat pulled low, and moved with the careful deliberation of someone who'd learned not to make sudden movements around nervous people. He stopped his mare about 20 feet from Evelyn's porch, keeping his hands visible on the saddle horn. "Ma'am." His voice was rough, like whiskey over gravel. "I mean, no trouble." "Then state your business and move on." Evelyn kept her voice steady, the rifle still. The man shifted in his saddle, and for the first time she got a clear look at his face. Late 30s, maybe 40. Hard lines around eyes that had seen things. A healing cut above his left eyebrow. Beard stubble that suggested he'd been on the trail for days. And something else. A wariness. A haunted quality that Evelyn recognized because she'd seen it in her own mirror. "I'm looking for work," he said. "Food and shelter in exchange for labor. I'm a fair hand with livestock, can mend fences, chop wood. I don't drink, don't gamble, and I keep to myself." "Town's 3 miles that way." Evelyn jerked her chin toward the valley. "They've got a boarding house. Sometimes the ranches need hands." "I tried the town." Something flickered across his face. "Didn't work out." Evelyn studied him. The mare's flanks were heaving slightly, evidence of a hard climb. The man's gear was minimal. Bedroll, saddlebags that didn't look full, canteen. No visible weapons, though that didn't mean much. What struck her most was the stillness in him. He wasn't fidgeting, wasn't trying to charm her or plead, just waiting, patient, like a man who'd asked this question before and was used to hearing no. "What's your name?" she asked. "Caleb Rourke." "What are you running from, Caleb Rourke?" His jaw tightened. "Nothing that'll follow me here." "That's not an answer." "It's the only one I'm offering." They looked at each other across the dusty yard. The sun was sinking fast now, painting the mountains in shades of amber and violet. In another hour, it would be dark. The temperature would drop. A man alone on the mountain at night would have a cold time of it. Evelyn thought about the coming winter, about all the work still to be done. She'd been doing it alone for 5 years, but that didn't mean it was efficient. Another pair of hands, someone to help with the heavy lifting, the endless tasks. "I don't tolerate stealing," she said finally, "or lying, or laziness. You work every day, earn your keep, or you leave. I'm not running a charity." Something shifted in Caleb's expression. Not quite hope, but an easing of tension. "Yes, ma'am. There's a lean-to on the east side of the cabin. It's weatherproof. You can sleep there. Meals are at dawn and dusk. You'll take orders from me without question or argument." "Understood." "And if I find out you're bringing trouble to my door, whatever you're running from, I'll shoot you myself and bury you where no one will find you. Are we clear?" "Crystal, ma'am." Evelyn lowered the rifle. "Tend to your horse. There's a corral out back with feed. When you're done, come to the cabin. I'll have supper ready." Caleb touched the brim of his hat, the closest thing to a thank you, and guided his mare around the side of the cabin. Evelyn watched him go, then returned to her apple slicing. She wasn't sure if she'd just made a practical decision or a mistake. Time would tell. But one thing was certain. If the winter she felt coming actually arrived, she'd need all the help she could get. Caleb proved himself useful from the first morning. Evelyn woke before dawn, as she always did, and found him already at work. He'd repaired a section of corral fence that had been sagging for weeks, restacked the woodpile with better spacing for airflow, and was hauling water from the creek when she stepped out onto the porch. "Coffee's on," she called. He set down the buckets and followed her inside, removing his hat. The cabin was small, one main room with a fireplace, a cooking area, and a table. A bedroom sectioned off in the back. Simple, functional, clean. They ate in silence. Evelyn had learned to appreciate quiet. Too many people felt the need to fill every moment with words, as if silence was something to be afraid of. Caleb didn't seem to suffer from that particular affliction. "What needs doing today, Oig?" he asked, finishing his eggs. Evelyn laid out the work. More apple processing. She needed the last of the potato crop dug up and stored. The chimney wanted cleaning before winter, firewood to split. The list was long. It was always long. Caleb nodded and got to work. Over the following days, a rhythm developed. They worked side by side but separate, each focused on their tasks. Evelyn found herself appreciating his competence. He didn't need instruction twice, didn't cut corners, and brought a methodical efficiency to everything he touched. He was stronger than she was, obviously, and took on the heavier work without being asked. More than that, he didn't talk, didn't pry, didn't ask why a woman alone was preparing for apocalypse on a Montana ridge. He just worked. A week after his arrival, Evelyn woke to a changed sky. The air felt different, heavy, expectant. The wind had shifted to the north. She stepped outside and saw Caleb standing at the edge of the plateau, looking toward the mountains. "Feel that?" he asked as she approached. "Yes." "Storm coming. Big one, I'd say." Evelyn nodded. She could feel it too. But it wasn't just a storm. It was the beginning of something larger. The first warning shot. "We need to accelerate the preparations," she said. "Everything that can be preserved, we preserve. Everything that can be stored, we store. We've got maybe 2 weeks before the weather turns for good." Caleb looked at her, and for the first time, she saw understanding in his eyes. Not pity, not confusion, recognition. He felt it too. "What do you need me to do?" he asked. They worked 18-hour days for the next 2 weeks. Evelyn taught Caleb her preservation methods, and he proved a quick study. Together they processed the last of the garden harvest, smoked fish, rendered tallow, and chopped enough firewood to heat the cabin through multiple winters. They reinforced the cabin's roof, checked every seal around windows and doors, and organized the cellars with military precision. The town below continued its lazy autumn routine. Evelyn saw the smoke from their chimneys, heard the occasional sound of music drifting up on clear evenings. They didn't see what was coming, or they didn't want to see it. On the 15th day after Caleb's arrival, the first snow fell. Just a dusting, melting by noon. But it was early, too early. October snow in Montana wasn't unheard of, but this felt different. Purposeful. A promise. That night, sitting by the fire after supper, Caleb finally spoke about himself. "I was in the war," he said quietly. "Did things I'm not proud of. Saw things that don't leave you. After, I drifted. Tried to outrun the memories, I guess. Worked ranches, logging camps, mines. Never stayed long. Then last spring, I was in a town in Wyoming. Got into trouble defending a woman from some men who didn't understand the word no. Put 2 of them in the ground." Evelyn listened without interrupting. "Law said it was justified. But the men had brothers, family. I left before it became a blood feud." He stared into the fire. "I'm not a good man, Mrs. Cross, but I'm not the worst either. And I know how to work, how to be useful. That's all I've got left." "You've been useful here," Evelyn said after a moment. "That's what matters." He nodded, and they returned to their companionable silence. The disaster came on a Tuesday morning in late October. Evelyn was in the cellar, rotating stored vegetables, when she heard it. A sound like thunder, but wrong. Too long, too rolling. The ground trembled beneath her feet. She scrambled up the cellar stairs and ran outside. Caleb was already there, staring at the mountains, at the massive scar of fresh earth cutting across the northern slope, at the avalanche of rock and soil that had torn loose and was still sliding, still falling, carrying trees and boulders down into the valley below. "Oh God," Evelyn breathed. The landslide hit the valley road with devastating force. She watched, helpless, as tons of earth buried the only wagon route in and out of Clements Ridge. The dust cloud rose hundreds of feet in the air, turning the morning sky brown. When it settled, the silence was absolute. "They're cut off," Caleb said. "No way in or out until spring." Evelyn's mind raced. The town had maybe a month of normal supplies. They weren't prepared for isolation. Why would they be? The road had always been there. The supply wagons had always come. People didn't prepare for things that had never happened before. "How long until they start to panic?" Caleb asked. "A week. Maybe 2 if they ration smart." Evelyn turned to look at him. "They won't ration smart." Over the next 3 days, the reality settled over the valley like a funeral shroud. Evelyn could see the activity from her ridge, people gathering, gesturing toward the blocked road, undoubtedly arguing about what to do. Some probably wanted to try clearing it, but the landslide had been massive and winter was coming fast. Even if they cleared it before the snows came, it would take weeks. Weeks they didn't have. On the 4th day, the first visitor arrived at Evelyn's cabin. Martha Hadley, the woman from the general store, came huffing up the trail with her husband Robert. They looked exhausted, frightened. Evelyn met them on the porch, Caleb standing quietly behind her. "Evelyn," Martha panted, "thank heavens, we need help." "What kind of help?" "Food, supplies. The store's almost empty. People panicked and bought everything. We heard you'd been preparing. We thought maybe you could spare some—" "No," Evelyn said. Martha blinked. "What?" "I said no. I have enough for myself and my hired hand, that's all." Robert Hadley stepped forward, his face reddening. "Now you listen here. We're in a crisis. Christian charity demands—" "Christian charity should have been on your mind when you called me crazy all summer," Evelyn interrupted. "I warned you. I told Martha specifically that this winter would be hard. You laughed. We didn't know." Martha's voice rose. "How could we know? You could have paid attention. You could have prepared. You could have done a dozen things instead of assuming everything would be fine, because it always had been." Evelyn's voice was hard. "I'm sorry, but your poor planning isn't my emergency." "There are children in that town," Robert said. "You'd let children starve?" Something in Evelyn's chest twisted. Children. She thought of Thomas, of the baby they'd never had, of all the futures that had died with him. "The children can come here," she said finally. "Just the children. I'll feed them, but the adults need to figure out their own survival." Martha's face crumpled with relief. "Oh, thank you, thank you. Don't thank me yet. You're going to have to make some hard choices about who eats and who doesn't. And when your neighbors come demanding to know where the children are getting food, you're going to have to stand firm. Can you do that?" The Hadleys looked at each other. Robert nodded slowly. "We'll do what we have to." "Then send them up starting tomorrow. Dawn and dusk meals. They work while they're here. Even the young ones can help with small tasks. No free rides. Understood?" "Understood." After they left, Caleb spoke quietly. "That's going to cause trouble." "I know. The adults won't stand for it, seeing their children fed while they starve." "I know that too." Evelyn looked at him. "But I'm not going to let children die because their parents were fools. Are you with me on this?" Caleb's expression was unreadable. Then he nodded. "I'm with you." The next morning, 7 children arrived at dawn. The oldest was maybe 14. The youngest couldn't have been more than 5. They were scared, cold, and already looked hungry. Evelyn fed them oatmeal and bacon, then set them to work on age-appropriate tasks. The older ones helped with firewood and water hauling. The younger ones sorted dried beans and herbs. By dusk, there were 12 children. By the end of the week, 23. The cabin became controlled chaos. Evelyn organized them into shifts, rotating groups for meals and work. Caleb helped manage the older boys, teaching them practical skills while keeping order. It wasn't easy. The children were frightened, homesick, and increasingly aware that their parents were suffering. But they were alive. They were fed. And slowly, surprisingly, some of them started to adapt, started to learn, started to understand what Evelyn had known all along. Survival required work, discipline, and the willingness to face hard truths. Then the first snow came. Real snow, heavy and relentless, blanketing the valley in white. The temperature dropped to freezing and stayed there. Winter had arrived, and it had arrived angry. In town, Evelyn knew, the panic would be escalating, food running low, cold seeping into homes that weren't prepared, desperation taking root. She was right. On a gray November morning, a group of men appeared on the trail to her cabin. 8 of them, led by Ned Carver, who ran the saloon. They were armed, rifles, pistols, knives. Their faces were hard with hunger and determination. Evelyn saw them coming and called for Caleb. Together, they stood on the porch while the children huddled inside, peering through windows. "Morning, Evelyn," Ned called. His breath puffed white in the cold air. "We're here to collect some supplies. For the town, for the common good." "I've already told you," Evelyn said. "I'm feeding the children. That's all I can spare." "That's not going to work for us." Ned shifted his rifle. "See, our kids say you've got cellars full of food down there. Enough to feed the whole town, maybe. And here we are, starving, while you live like a queen." "I lived like a worker," Evelyn corrected, "all summer, while you drank in the saloon and called me broken. I earned what I have. You didn't." "Semantics," Ned spat in the snow. "We're taking what we need. You can either step aside peaceful-like, or we can do this the hard way." Evelyn felt Caleb tense beside her. She also felt something else, a cold, clear certainty. This was the moment she'd been preparing for. Not just the winter. This, the test of whether she had the spine to defend what she'd built. "No," she said simply. Ned's eyes narrowed. "You're one woman and a drifter against 8 armed men. Think hard about this." "I have thought about it. For 5 years, I've thought about it." Evelyn raised her rifle, aiming it squarely at Ned's chest. "You're on my property. You're threatening me. In Montana, that gives me legal right to defend myself. So here's how this is going to work. You're going to turn around and walk back down that trail, or I'm going to shoot you. Then I'm going to shoot whoever's next. Maybe I'll get 3 or 4 of you before you get me. Maybe Caleb here will get a few more. How many of you are willing to die today for a gamble that might not even work out?" The men shifted uneasily. One of them, younger than the others, actually stepped back. But Ned held his ground. "You're bluffing. Try me." The standoff stretched. Wind whipped snow across the plateau. The temperature was dropping. It was always dropping now. Evelyn's finger rested on the trigger, steady. She'd never shot a person before. Wasn't sure if she actually could. But Ned didn't need to know that. Finally, Caleb spoke. His voice was low, conversational, and somehow more menacing because of it. "I've killed men before," he said. "War, self-defense, accidents. Stopped counting after a while. And I'll tell you something about killing. It gets easier each time. The first one tears you up. By the 10th, it's just another thing you do. So ask yourself, is she bluffing? Maybe. Is she willing to let me kill for her? Definitely." He paused. "And boys, I haven't had to kill anyone in almost a year. Part of me misses the simplicity of it." The men looked at each other. The wind howled, and slowly, one by one, they began backing away. "This isn't over," Ned snarled. "Winter's long. You can't watch your back every second." "Neither can you," Evelyn said. "And I promise you, if anyone lays a hand on these children, I will hunt you through the snow and put a bullet in you myself. Spread the word." They left, trudging back down the trail in angry silence. Evelyn didn't lower her rifle until they were out of sight. Then she started shaking. Caleb gently took the rifle from her hands. "You did good." "I'm not sure I could have actually shot him." "Doesn't matter. He believed you could. That's what mattered." Evelyn looked at him. "You meant what you said. About killing." Every word. She should have been frightened, should have questioned who she'd let onto her land, but instead she felt a strange gratitude. Whatever Caleb Rourke had been, whatever he'd done, he was here now, and he was on her side. "We need to prepare," she said. "They'll come back, and next time they'll come at night." The children had heard everything. When Evelyn and Caleb came inside, 23 pairs of eyes stared at them with new understanding. These weren't just kids anymore. They were survivors in training. "Listen to me," Evelyn said, gathering them close. "What's happening in town is going to get worse before it gets better. People are scared and hungry, and that makes them dangerous. Some of them will blame me for being prepared. Some will blame you for eating while your parents starve. It's not fair, but life rarely is." "My pa said you should share," a 10-year-old named Billy spoke up. He said it's the Christian thing. Your pa is welcome to share what he has, Evelyn said, but he doesn't get to share what's mine. I worked for this. I sacrificed for this. And I'm keeping you alive with it. Don't let anyone make you feel guilty for surviving. Sarah, the 14-year-old, raised her hand. What if they come back? What do we do? You hide. There's a root cellar with a false back. Caleb will show you. If trouble comes, you go there and you stay quiet until one of us comes for you. What if they hurt you? A small voice asked. What if they hurt Mr. Caleb? Evelyn looked at Caleb, then back at the children. Then you wait until spring, and you tell someone what happened. But we're not planning on that. We're planning on winning. Over the next days, Evelyn and Caleb turned the cabin into a fortress. They reinforced doors and windows, set up early warning signals, strings with bells that would sound if someone approached from the trails. Caleb fashioned simple traps at strategic points around the property. Nothing lethal, but enough to slow people down and make noise. The older children wanted to help. Sarah and two of the teenage boys, Marcus and James, approached Evelyn one evening. Teach us, Sarah said. Teach us to defend this place. Evelyn wanted to say no, wanted to protect them from that burden. But she looked at their faces, already harder than they should be, already understanding what was at stake, and realized they'd already lost their innocence. Caleb, she called, we're going to need more rifles. They spent the next week training. The children learned to load and fire, learned to stay calm under pressure, learned that sometimes survival meant being willing to do terrible things. It broke Evelyn's heart, but she'd learned 5 years ago that a broken heart was better than a dead body. The second attack came on a foggy morning in mid-November. Evelyn woke to the sound of bells, not the steady warning of animals or wind, the frantic jangling of someone triggering the alarm strings. She rolled out of bed, grabbed her rifle, and rushed outside. Dark figures moving through the fog. More than before, maybe 15 men, spreading out, trying to surround the cabin. Evelyn fired a warning shot into the air. Get off my property, a voice shouted back. Not Ned this time, someone else. We just want the food, lady. Nobody has to get hurt. You're already hurting people by being here. Evelyn chambered another round. Last warning. They kept coming. Caleb emerged from the lean-to, rifle ready. East side, he called. 4 of them. Inside the cabin, Evelyn could hear the children moving. The older ones taking up positions at windows like they'd practiced. The younger ones heading for the hidden cellar. Her heart hammered. Then everything happened at once. The men rushed the cabin from 3 sides. Caleb fired, hitting someone. She heard the scream. Evelyn fired toward a cluster of shapes in the fog. The children fired from the windows. The noise was deafening, chaos and smoke and shouting. Someone reached the porch. Evelyn swung her rifle like a club, connecting with a man's jaw. He went down hard. Another grabbed at her, and she kicked, clawed, fought with everything she had. Then Caleb was there, pulling the man off her, driving his fist into the attacker's face with brutal efficiency. The man collapsed. More shots, more shouting. The fog swirled thick with gun smoke. Evelyn couldn't see clearly, couldn't tell friend from foe. She fired at anything that moved toward the cabin. And then, cutting through the chaos, a child's scream. High-pitched, terrified, abruptly cut short. Everything stopped. The fog began to clear as the sun rose higher, burning it away. Evelyn saw the men pulling back, scrambling down the trails. Saw the bodies on the ground, 2 men, both bleeding but alive. Saw Caleb standing over them, breathing hard. And then she saw what had made the children scream. A small body in the snow between the cabin and the corral. Tommy, 8 years old, blonde hair and gaps in his smile. He'd been heading to check on the horses, a chore he'd taken to without being asked because he loved the animals. He lay face down in the crimson-stained snow, still. Evelyn ran to him, already knowing but needing to see, needing to be sure. She turned him over gently. The bullet had caught him in the chest. His eyes were open, staring at nothing. Behind her, she heard children crying, heard Sarah screaming, heard the world fracture into something it couldn't come back from. Caleb knelt beside her. I'm sorry. God, Evelyn. I'm sorry. She couldn't speak, couldn't process. Tommy had been laughing yesterday, helping her knead bread, asking if she thought his ma would be proud of how hard he was working. Now he was gone. Just gone. 8 years old and dead because grown men couldn't control their fear. Evelyn stood slowly. She looked at the two wounded men on the ground, looked at the retreating figures disappearing into the trees. And something inside her changed, hardened, crystallized into something cold and absolutely certain. "No more," she said. Caleb stood beside her. "What?" "No more running, no more hiding, no more defense." She looked at him, and he actually took a step back from what he saw in her eyes. "They want war? They'll get war. Evelyn, find out who fired the shot that killed him. Find out who leads them now. Find out everything you can." Her voice was ice. "Because I'm going to teach this valley a lesson it will never forget. No one touches these children again. No one." She walked back to the cabin, where the surviving children huddled in shock and grief. They looked at her, looked at their protector who had failed to protect, and she saw the question in their eyes. What now? Evelyn gathered them close, all of them, pulled them into her arms the way she'd wanted to hold her own children if she'd ever had the chance. "We bury Tommy," she said quietly. "We mourn him, we remember him, and then we make sure he's the last, no matter what it takes. Do you understand? We end this. Together." 22 voices whispered agreement. 22 hearts hardened in grief and fury. 22 children who'd just learned that the world was more brutal than they'd imagined, and that sometimes survival meant fighting back. Outside, snow began to fall again. The valley below was quiet, shocked by its own violence. But on the ridge, in a small cabin surrounded by drying racks and root cellars, and the graves of dreams, something new was being forged. Not just survival, resistance. They buried Tommy that afternoon in ground that fought the shovel with every inch. The earth was already half frozen, reluctant to accept another body. Evelyn insisted on digging the grave herself, needing the physical pain to match what was tearing through her chest. Caleb worked beside her in silence, their breaths forming clouds in the bitter air. The children gathered around the small mound as the sun began its early descent behind the mountains. Sarah had washed Tommy's body and dressed him in his cleanest clothes, a shirt 2 sizes too big that had belonged to an older brother. Someone had picked wildflowers from the protected spots near the cabin foundation, already wilting in the cold. Evelyn stood at the head of the grave, 22 faces looking to her for words that should matter, that should somehow make sense of an 8-year-old boy bleeding out in the snow. She had nothing. Every platitude felt like a lie. Every comfort rang hollow. "Tommy loved the horses," she said finally, her voice rough. "He'd sneak them extra oats when he thought I wasn't looking. He had a good heart. Too good for this world, maybe." She paused, swallowing hard. "We're going to remember him, and we're going to make sure what happened to him doesn't happen to anyone else here. That's the only promise I can make that means anything." They filled in the grave as the temperature dropped. When it was done, Marcus, one of the older boys, spoke up. He was 13, tall for his age, with hands already calloused from farm work. "My father was one of them," he said quietly. "I saw him in the fog. He was there." The other children turned to stare. Sarah moved closer to Marcus, her face fierce. "That doesn't matter," she said. "We're not them anymore. We're something else now." "What are we?" a small voice asked. It was Emma, barely 6, clutching a rag doll. Evelyn looked at them. These children who'd been forced to grow up too fast, who'd fired rifles at their own neighbors, who'd watched a friend die. "We're survivors," she said, "and we're going to act like it." That night, after the children had finally fallen into exhausted sleep, Evelyn sat at the table with Caleb. Between them lay paper and pencil. She'd drawn a rough map of her property, the cabin, the cellars, the corral, the approach trails. "They'll come back," Caleb said. It wasn't a question. Within days. Tommy's death will have scared some of them, but it'll have hardened others. They'll think we're weakened, grief-stricken, easier targets. Are we? Weakened? Evelyn met his eyes. "No, we're done being targets entirely." She pointed to spots on the map. "We've been thinking defensively, protecting what we have. That's not enough anymore. We need to make approaching this ridge so dangerous, so costly, that they won't try it again." "You're talking about traps." "I'm talking about whatever works." Evelyn's voice was flat. "They drew first blood. They killed a child. I'm not going to apologize for making them regret it." Caleb studied her face for a long moment. You've changed. 5 years ago, I was a woman who let winter take her husband because I wasn't prepared. Then I spent 5 years preparing for weather. But I wasn't preparing for people, for the violence that comes when comfort disappears. She traced a line on the map. I'm not making that mistake again. What do you need from me? Everything you know about warfare, about ambush, about making 12 women and children hold ground against 50 men if it comes to that. It might come to that, Caleb warned. Then we'll be ready. They worked through the night, planning. Caleb sketched out defensive positions, fields of fire, fallback points. Evelyn calculated supplies, ammunition, how long they could hold if the town committed to a siege. The numbers weren't good, but they were better than nothing. As dawn approached, Caleb set down his pencil. There's something you should know about me. You killed men in Wyoming. You told me. That's not all of it. He stared at his hands. During the war, I was with a unit that specialized in unconventional tactics. We didn't fight fair battles. We set traps, ambushes, burned supply lines, terrorized the enemy until they were too afraid to move. I was good at it, too good. After the war ended, I couldn't stop thinking that way. Everywhere I went, I saw angles, weaknesses, how to hurt people efficiently. Why are you telling me this? Because if we go down this path, I can help you win. But it won't be clean. It won't be honorable. And you'll have to live with what we do. He looked at her. Are you sure you want that? Evelyn thought about Tommy's body in her arms, about his mother in town, probably sick with grief, probably blaming Evelyn for not protecting him well enough, about all the children still sleeping in the cabin, still vulnerable, still depending on her to keep them alive. I'm sure, she said. Over the next 3 days, they transformed the ridge into a nightmare. Caleb showed the older children how to dig pit traps on the approach trails, not deep enough to kill, but enough to break an ankle, to slow attackers down. They strung tripwires at shin height, connected to bells that would give early warning. At Evelyn's insistence, they created false paths that looked safe but led to dead ends or unstable ground. Sarah proved to have a talent for it. She suggested they scatter caltrop-style objects, sharpened sticks frozen into ice balls, across the most obvious approach routes. Horses won't like those, she said with grim satisfaction. Anyone riding up will have to go slow or risk laming their mount. Marcus and James worked on reinforcing the cabin itself. They built interior barricades that could be thrown up quickly, created firing ports and strategic walls, and established a water supply inside so they wouldn't have to venture out during an attack. The younger children had their own tasks. Emma and the other small ones were trained to reload rifles, a simple mechanical task that freed up the older children to keep firing. They practiced until their small hands could work the mechanisms without thinking. Evelyn watched them all adapt, watched childhood slip away like snow melting under spring sun. It hurt, but the alternative hurt worse. On the 4th day after Tommy's death, Caleb returned from a scouting trip to the valley's edge. His face was grim. They're organizing, he reported, not just the desperate ones anymore. I saw the mayor, the banker, even the preacher. They're calling it a rescue mission, claiming you're holding the children hostage. Evelyn's jaw tightened. Of course they are. Easier to be the heroes than to admit they failed their own families. There's more. They've got maybe 40 men willing to fight. They're planning to come up in force. Overwhelming numbers. When? 2 days, maybe 3. They're gathering weapons, working up their courage. Sarah had been listening from the doorway. We can't fight 40 men. No, Evelyn agreed. We can't, not in open battle. She looked at Caleb. But we don't have to. We just have to make them bleed enough that they lose their nerve. That night, Evelyn gathered all the children. She didn't sugarcoat what was coming. They deserved the truth. In a few days, a lot of men are going to try to take this cabin. They'll say they're rescuing you. They'll claim we're the villains in this story. She paused. Some of their fathers will be with them. Maybe all of them. And you're going to have to choose. Do you want to go back to town, back to people who couldn't protect you, who let you go hungry? Or do you want to stay here and fight for the only place that's kept you safe? There are parents, a boy named Jacob said quietly. Doesn't that matter? It should, Evelyn said. But love doesn't fill bellies. It doesn't stop bullets. And right now, Your parents' love is telling them to take from someone who prepared instead of preparing themselves. Is that the kind of love you want to return to? The children looked at each other. No one spoke for a long moment. Then Sarah stood. I'm staying. Whatever comes, I'm staying here. Marcus stood. Me too. One by one, they rose. Even the youngest, even Emma, with her rag doll clutched tight. All 22 of them. We're staying, they said in voices that shook but didn't break. We're staying. Evelyn felt something crack inside her chest. Pride. Grief. Love for these children who weren't hers but had become hers anyway. She nodded, not trusting her voice. Then we make them regret coming up this mountain. The preparations intensified. Caleb taught the older children how to move through the forest quietly, how to flank an enemy, how to disappear and reappear like ghosts. They practiced coordinated firing, not everyone shooting at once, but in waves, so the attackers would never get a moment's peace. Evelyn worked on the psychological warfare. She had the children create scarecrow-like figures and place them at various points around the property. In the fog or low light, they'd look like additional defenders. She also started a rumor, sending down a message through one of the younger children who still had family in town. The widow on the ridge had hired professional gunmen, mercenaries, the kind who killed for money and didn't ask questions. It was a lie, but lies could be weapons too. On the 6th day after Tommy's burial, scouts from town were spotted observing the cabin from a distance. Caleb let them see him, let them see his rifle, his competent movements, his military bearing. Let them report back that the widow wasn't alone, that her hired man looked dangerous. The next day, Evelyn made a choice that surprised even Caleb. She wrote a letter and had Marcus deliver it to his father in town. The letter was simple. You have until tomorrow at sunset to send a representative to discuss terms. If you attack without talking first, we will defend ourselves with everything we have. Children will see their fathers die. Fathers will see their children defend the people who actually fed them. This doesn't have to end in more blood, but it will, if you force it to. Evelyn Cross. Marcus came back that evening, shaken. My pa read it in front of everyone. Half of them wanted to burn it and come up tonight. The other half looked scared. Which half won? Evelyn asked. Don't know yet, but the mayor, Barrett Hale, he was the loudest about coming up. Kept saying you had no right to the food, that it belonged to the community. Caleb's eyes narrowed at the name. Barrett Hale. Big man? Expensive clothes even in winter? That's him. You know him? Not personally, but I know the type. Rich before the disaster, probably owns half the town. Sees this as a chance to consolidate power. If he controls the food supply, he controls everything, Evelyn finished. The pieces were fitting together. This isn't about starving people. It's about politics, about who runs Clements Ridge when spring comes. And Tommy died for that, Sarah said bitterly. Tommy died because desperate people do terrible things, Evelyn corrected. But you're right. Someone's using that desperation. And if it's Hale, we're not just fighting hunger, we're fighting ambition. The deadline came and went without a representative. Evelyn watched the sunset from her porch, Caleb beside her, and knew what it meant. They're coming tonight, he said. I know. You should send the children away. Hide them in the forest. It's not too late. And when the men get here and find the cabin empty, they'll burn it out of spite, destroy the supplies. Then where would we be? Evelyn shook her head. No, we hold together. As darkness fell, they made final preparations. The children took their positions, older ones at windows and firing ports, younger ones in the reinforced interior room with ammunition and water. Evelyn checked every rifle, every gun, made sure everyone knew their role. Remember, she told them, we're not trying to kill anyone. We're trying to stop them. Aim for legs if you can. Make noise. Make them think there's more of us than there are. And if it gets bad, if they breach the cabin, you run. Don't be heroes. Just run and hide and survive. Understand? They nodded, faces pale but determined. The attack came 2 hours after full dark. Evelyn heard them before she saw them, 40 men moving through the forest with the subtle grace of a stampede. They weren't trying to be quiet. They were trying to be intimidating. It worked. Evelyn felt her heart hammer against her ribs. The first man to hit a trap screamed. The sound echoed across the ridge, surprise and pain. Then another scream. Another. The caltrop ice balls were doing their job. "Hold fire," Evelyn commanded. "Let them get closer." The men below were shouting now, cursing, trying to organize. Someone lit a torch, then another. Soon there were 20 torches creating a ring of light that destroyed their own night vision. "Amateurs," Caleb muttered. When the first group reached the cabin perimeter, maybe 20 feet from the porch, Evelyn gave the signal. "Fire!" The night exploded with gunfire. The children fired from every window, every port, the noise deafening. They weren't aiming to kill, just aiming in the general direction, filling the air with lead and terror. The attackers scattered, diving for cover. Someone screamed they were hit. Torches dropped, setting patches of snow hissing and steaming. "Cease fire," Evelyn commanded. "Reload!" In the sudden silence, she heard the men below arguing, heard someone saying this was suicide, that they should leave. Heard Barrett Hale's voice, recognizable now, loud and angry, telling them to hold, to regroup, that it was just noise, just a few lucky shots. "He's trying to rally them," Caleb said. "Then we break their spirit before he can." Evelyn had prepared for this. She leaned out the window and shouted, her voice carrying clear in the cold air. "That's your children firing at you, your sons and daughters. They chose to stay here because you failed them. You want them back? Prove you deserve them. Go home, prepare your own supplies. And when spring comes, we'll talk like civilized people." "You don't own them," a man shouted back. "They're our family." "Then act like family. Feed them. Protect them. You're down there trying to steal instead of doing the hard work of surviving." "What kind of example is that?" Another voice, younger. "Sarah? Sarah, honey, it's Pa. Come on down, baby. Everything's going to be okay." Sarah appeared at the window beside Evelyn. Her voice was steady. "I'm not coming, Pa. Not until you can keep me safe like Mrs. Cross does." "Baby, please. Go home. Plant winter gardens in your cellar. Ration what you have. Do something besides take from others. Then maybe I'll come home." The silence that followed was profound. Evelyn could almost feel the shift in the air, fathers confronting the reality that their children had lost faith in them. Then Barrett Hale's voice cut through again. "Don't listen to her. She's been poisoned against you. They're holding her hostage with food, manipulating her." "Shut up, Hale," another man said. "Just shut up." We came here because you told us to," the man interrupted. "You said it would be easy. You said the widow would cave. Well, she didn't cave, and now Thompson's got a bullet in his leg, and I'm standing here pointing a gun at a house full of children. My children. How is this right?" Murmuring spread through the group below. Evelyn sensed the moment crystallizing. They were on the edge of breaking. "Marcus," she called. "Come here." Marcus appeared, rifle still in hand. She gestured for him to speak to the men below. "I'm staying because I choose to," Marcus shouted. "Not because anyone's making me. Up here, I work hard and I eat. Down there, I'd watch you all fight over scraps. I'm 13 years old, and I understand what you don't. There's no help coming. No supply wagons, no rescue. We survive by working or we die. And I choose work." "We're working," someone protested. "We're trying to clear the road." "The road won't be clear until spring," Caleb interjected, his voice carrying military authority. "The snow's too deep, the ground too frozen. You're wasting energy on false hope. Every calorie you burn on that road is a calorie you need for staying warm and alive." The argument below intensified. Men were turning on each other now, the unified purpose dissolving. Someone threw a punch. Others moved to separate the fighters. The torches wavered as people moved in chaos. "Now," Evelyn whispered to Caleb, "while they're distracted." Caleb fired a single shot into the air. The fighting stopped. "Here's what's going to happen," Evelyn called out. "You're going to leave. Tonight. Now. Go back to town and figure out how to survive without stealing. The children who want to stay here can stay. The ones who want to risk going back can go, but they leave all the food and supplies they've accumulated here. They go back to the same situation you're in." "That's not fair," someone shouted. "Fair? You came to my home with guns. You killed an 8-year-old boy, and you want to talk about fair?" Evelyn's voice could have cut glass. "You get one more chance. One. Leave now, or the next shots won't be warnings. And don't think I won't do it. I've already buried one child. I won't bury more because grown men couldn't control themselves. For a long moment, nothing moved. Then, slowly, men started backing away. Not all of them. Some still stood firm, still looked ready to fight. But enough left that the force was broken, scattered. Barrett Hale's voice rose in fury. You cowards! There's 40 of us and 12 of them. We can— Shut your mouth, Hale. This voice was new, older, weighted with authority. Evelyn recognized it as the mayor, William Thornton. You've cost us enough blood tonight. Thompson might lose his leg. Young Billy Carson's got a face full of splinters from a ricochet. And for what? So you can control the food supply? We see what you're doing. I'm trying to save this town. You're trying to own it. There's a difference. Thornton stepped forward, illuminated by torchlight. He looked up at the cabin. Mrs. Cross, I'm proposing a truce. We leave tonight. No more attacks. In exchange, you keep feeding the children, and maybe, if you can spare it, we send up the elderly too, the ones who can't fight for scraps. Evelyn considered. The elderly would strain supplies, but not catastrophically, and having Thornton as a buffer against Hale could be valuable. The elderly can come, she agreed, but they work too. Everyone works, and if anyone tries another attack, the deal's off and you're on your own. Agreed. One more thing, Evelyn added. Barrett Hale is not welcome on this ridge. Not now, not ever. He orchestrated this attack. He got Tommy killed. If I see him within 100 yards of my property, I'll shoot him on sight. Thornton glanced at Hale, whose face was purple with rage. Noted. The men retreated, carrying their wounded, arguing among themselves. Barrett Hale was shouting about betrayal, about cowardice, but no one was listening anymore. The spell was broken. As the last torches disappeared down the trail, Evelyn sagged against the window frame. Her hands were shaking. Beside her, Sarah was crying, quiet tears that spoke of relief and exhaustion and the terrible weight of standing against your own father. You did good, Evelyn told her, pulling the girl close. You did so good. Did I? Sarah's voice was muffled against Evelyn's shoulder. I pointed a gun at my pa. You defended your life. There's no shame in that. Caleb was checking the other children, making sure no one was hurt. They were scared, wired, coming down from the adrenaline. But they were alive. All of them. As the night deepened and the children finally settled into exhausted sleep, Evelyn stood outside looking at the stars. Caleb joined her, 2 cups of coffee steaming in his hands. We won tonight, he said. We survived tonight, Evelyn corrected. Winning comes later. What do you mean? Barrett Hale. He's not going to forget this, and winter's not over. She sipped the coffee, feeling it burn down her throat. We've made an enemy, a powerful one. And the thing about powerful enemies is they don't stop. They just get smarter. So what do we do? Evelyn looked at the cabin behind them, at the children sleeping inside, at the supplies that would keep them alive, at the stronghold they'd built from nothing but will and work. We prepare for the next battle, she said, and we make sure that when it comes, we're ready to end this for good. The elderly started arriving 3 days later, moving up the trail in small groups like pilgrims seeking sanctuary. They came with nothing but the clothes on their backs and the shame of needing help. Evelyn met each one at the property line, assessed their ability to work, and assigned them tasks that matched their strength. No exceptions. No charity. An old woman named Ruth, bent with arthritis but sharp-eyed, was put in charge of mending clothes and teaching the younger children to sew. A former carpenter named Henry, 70 if he was a day, supervised repairs to the lean-to and showed Marcus how to reinforce joints properly. Even those who could barely walk were given work sorting beans, carting wool, keeping the fires fed. I don't take passengers, Evelyn told each new arrival. You work or you leave. Those are the terms. Not one of them argued. They'd seen what arguing got you in Clements Ridge: hunger, cold, and the slow erosion of dignity. Up on the ridge, there was food and warmth, but more than that, there was purpose. People who'd spent weeks sitting idle, watching their bodies waste, came alive again with something to do. Within a week, the population of Evelyn's fortress had grown to 37. The cabin was beyond crowded, bodies sleeping shoulder to shoulder on the floor, but the work got done faster. More wood chopped, more food prepared, more defenses maintained. They were becoming something Evelyn hadn't quite intended. A community forged not by choice, but by necessity. bound together by the understanding that the valley below had failed them all. Caleb noticed the change too. One evening, as they took inventory of supplies, he remarked, "You're building something here, something bigger than just survival." "I'm keeping people alive," Evelyn corrected. "That's all." "Is it? Because it looks like you're creating an alternative to the town. A different way of living." Evelyn paused, her hand resting on a sack of dried beans. She hadn't thought of it that way, but maybe he was right. The ridge operated on principles the valley had abandoned. Work equals food, competence equals respect, preparation equals survival. No social hierarchy based on who you'd been before the disaster. The banker's daughter and the saloon girl's son worked side by side, equally valued for their contribution. "If that's what's happening," she said slowly, "then maybe that's what needs to happen. Maybe the old way was broken all along, and it took Winter to show it." The thought unsettled her. She'd never wanted to be a leader, never asked for this responsibility. She just wanted to survive. But somehow survival had expanded to include 22 children and 15 elderly folks, and with each person she fed, she was making a statement about what mattered and what didn't. Down in the valley, Barrett Hale was making his own statements. Caleb brought reports from scouting trips to the forest edge, where he could observe without being seen. Hale had positioned himself as the town's savior, organizing rationing committees and work details, speaking at gatherings about shared sacrifice and community strength. On the surface, it looked like leadership. Underneath, it was consolidation of power. "He's got people believing the attack on your cabin was a tragic misunderstanding," Caleb reported. "Says he was trying to negotiate, but hotheads took over. Now he's the reasonable one, the man with a plan." "What plan?" "Wait out the winter, keep the peace, and when spring comes, make sure he controls the food distribution so people remember who saved them." Caleb's expression was grim. "He's smart. He's not fighting you directly anymore. He's playing a longer game." While Sarah, who'd been listening from where she sat mending a shirt, spoke up. "My pa won't work with him. Pa hates Hale now. Says Hale got people killed for nothing." "Your father's just one man," Evelyn said gently. "Hale's got money, influence, probably owns debts half the town can't pay. When people are desperate, they follow whoever promises them comfort, even if it's a lie." "So what do we do?" Evelyn looked at the girl, 14 years old and asking strategic questions like a general. The thought simultaneously broke her heart and filled her with fierce pride. "We keep people alive up here. We prove there's another way. And when spring comes, we let the town see what we've built. Let them decide if they want to keep following Hale or try something different." But Winter had other plans. The storm hit on the first day of December, rolling down from the mountains with a fury that made previous snowfalls look gentle. Wind screamed across the ridge, driving snow horizontal, piling drifts against the cabin walls that climbed toward the roof. The temperature plummeted to 20 below, then 30. The world became a white void where you couldn't see 10 feet in any direction. They huddled inside for 3 days while the storm raged. 37 people packed into a space meant for one family, breathing each other's air, listening to the wind trying to tear the roof off. The children pressed against the elderly for warmth. Caleb and the older boys took shifts keeping the fires burning, rationing wood because no one could get outside to bring more from the covered pile. On the second day, Emma started coughing. By nightfall, it had spread to 4 other children. Evelyn recognized the wet, rattling sound, pneumonia's calling card. The same sound Thomas had made before he died. Ruth, the old woman with arthritis, had some knowledge of medicine. She brewed pine needle tea for the vitamin content, made poultices for the children's chests, and kept them warm. But her face was grave. "We need real medicine," she told Evelyn quietly. "Laudanum for the pain, maybe some whiskey to cut the congestion. I can keep them comfortable, but without proper medicine." She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. Evelyn had watched pneumonia kill once before. She knew how it ended. The storm finally broke on the 4th day, leaving the world transformed. Snow had buried the lower trails completely. The drifts against the cabin were over 6 feet high. Everything was white and silent and hostile. Caleb volunteered to dig out to the woodpile. It took him 2 hours. When he came back inside, his face was frost-burned and his hands were shaking from cold despite the gloves. "The town," he said, breathing hard. "I could see smoke, but less than before. Maybe half as many chimneys burning." "Running out of fuel," Henry, the old carpenter, said. We gave them a week, maybe 2, before people start burning furniture. After that, people would freeze. The equation was simple and brutal. Without fire, the Montana winter killed you. Fast. Emma's cough was worse. She lay in Evelyn's bed. Evelyn had given it up, small and shivering despite the blankets piled on top of her. Her lips were taking on a bluish tinge. Ruth shook her head when Evelyn looked at her questioningly. Tomorrow, maybe the next day, Ruth whispered. I'm sorry. Without medicine, there's nothing more I can do. Evelyn felt something crack inside her. Not again. She couldn't watch another person die from pneumonia, couldn't hold another cold body and know she'd failed. Once was enough for a lifetime. She found Caleb checking the ammunition supplies. I need to go to town. He looked at her like she'd lost her mind. It's suicide. The trails are buried. The town might shoot you on sight after everything that's happened. And even if you make it there and back, what are you going to get? They don't have medicine either. Barrett Hale has medicine, Evelyn said with certainty. Men like him always prepare for themselves. He'll have a private supply somewhere, and I'm going to take it. That's robbery. That's survival. He helped kill Tommy. He tried to steal our food. I'm done playing fair with men who make up rules that only benefit themselves. Caleb studied her face, then slowly nodded. You'll need help. Someone who knows how to move quiet, how to break into places. I need you here protecting everyone else. You need someone who's done this before, Caleb corrected. Breaking into enemy supply depots was my specialty during the war. I can get in and out of Hale's place without anyone knowing we were there. We? You think I'm letting you go alone? His voice was firm. You saved my life when you gave me shelter. Let me return the favor. They left before dawn the next morning, telling only Sarah and Marcus where they were going. The journey down to the valley was treacherous. The snow was waist-deep in places, the wind still gusting hard enough to knock them off balance. Twice Caleb had to pull Evelyn out of drifts that had hidden holes underneath. It took 3 hours to cover what should have been a 40-minute walk. The town was ghostly quiet. Smoke rose from maybe 20 buildings. The rest were dark, shuttered, possibly abandoned. Evelyn saw no movement in the streets, no one venturing out into the brutal cold. Hale's house, the largest in town, a 2-story structure that proclaimed his wealth, sat at the far end of the main street, smoke rising from its chimney. They circled around to approach from the back, moving between buildings, using the storm-sculpted drifts for cover. Caleb moved like a shadow, utterly silent. Evelyn tried to match him, but felt clumsy by comparison. The back door to Hale's house was locked. Caleb produced a thin piece of metal from his coat and worked it into the mechanism with practiced ease. The lock clicked open. Inside, the house was warm. Shockingly, wastefully warm. A fire blazed in the parlor. Lamps burned in multiple rooms. While the rest of the town froze and starved, Barrett Hale lived in comfort. Upstairs, Caleb whispered. Medicines usually kept in bedrooms or a study. They climbed the stairs, testing each step before putting weight on it to avoid creaks. The second floor had 4 rooms. Caleb took 2, Evelyn took the others. She moved quickly, searching drawers and cabinets, trying not to disturb anything enough that it would be noticed. In what appeared to be Hale's personal bedroom, she found it, a locked cabinet built into the wall. Through the glass door, she could see bottles, laudanum, morphine, quinine, a small fortune in medicines that Hale had hoarded while the town suffered. Her anger was a living thing, hot and acidic in her throat. She used the butt of her knife to break the glass, wincing at the sound. Quickly, she grabbed bottles, stuffing them into her coat pockets. Someone's coming, Caleb hissed from the doorway. They heard footsteps on the stairs, heavy boots, a man's voice calling out, Mr. Hale? Sir? I heard breaking glass. There was no time to run. Caleb pulled Evelyn into a closet, pressing them both against the back wall behind hanging coats. Through the crack in the door, Evelyn watched a man enter the bedroom, one of Hale's hired hands carrying a pistol. The man saw the broken cabinet immediately. He moved closer, peering at the shattered glass, and Evelyn felt Caleb tense beside her. His hand moved to his knife. She grabbed his wrist, shaking her head. Not unless we have to. The man stood there for what felt like an eternity, clearly trying to decide what to do. Then he called down the stairs, Mr. Hale! Sir! Someone's been in your medicine cabinet. Footsteps pounded up the stairs. Multiple people. Evelyn's heart hammered. They were trapped. Barrett Hale entered the room in his nightshirt, face flushed with anger. What? Who would dare? He saw the broken glass and went purple. Find them! Search every room! They can't have gone far! Men scattered to search. One headed straight for the closet. Evelyn pressed herself flatter against the wall, but there was nowhere to hide. The door swung open. For one frozen second, the man stared at them. Then Caleb moved, faster than Evelyn had ever seen anyone move. He drove his fist into the man's throat, cutting off his shout, then caught him as he fell and lowered him silently to the floor. Go, Caleb whispered urgently. Window, fire escape on the east side. They ran. Behind them, she heard Hale screaming, heard men shouting. Evelyn threw open a window and climbed out onto a narrow metal landing. Caleb followed, pulling the window shut behind them. The fire escape was icy, treacherous. Evelyn's feet slipped on the first step and she nearly went over the railing. Caleb grabbed her coat, steadied her. They descended as fast as they dared, hearing the window above slam open, hearing Hale's voice shouting, There! On the fire escape! Stop them! A gunshot cracked. The bullet sparked off the metal railing near Evelyn's head. She and Caleb jumped the last 6 feet, landed hard in a snowdrift, and ran. The town came alive behind them. Men poured from Hale's house, lanterns bobbing in the pre-dawn darkness. More shots fired. Evelyn heard bullets whine past, heard Caleb curse as one came too close. They made it to the edge of town and plunged into the forest. Behind them, the pursuit continued, but the snow that had made their approach difficult now worked in their favor. In the darkness and drifts, tracking was nearly impossible. They climbed, using trees for cover, moving as fast as exhaustion allowed. An hour later, high on the ridge trail, Evelyn finally let herself look back. The town was distant below, torches still moving but not following this far up. They'd made it. Caleb was breathing hard, one hand pressed to his side. You hit? Evelyn asked. Grazed. I'll live. He managed a tight smile. Did you get the medicine? Evelyn patted her coat, feeling the bottles still intact. Every drop I could carry. Then it was worth it. They reached the cabin as the sun broke over the mountains. Sarah met them at the door, her face flooding with relief. We heard shots. We thought, We're fine, Evelyn said, pushing past into the warmth. Where's Emma? Ruth was with the sick children, dabbing at Emma's fevered forehead. The little girl's breathing was labored, each breath a struggle. Evelyn pulled out the laudanum with shaking hands. How much? She asked Ruth. Half a spoonful. We need to stretch it. Evelyn measured carefully, supporting Emma's head, coaxing her to swallow. The girl's eyes fluttered open, unfocused and glassy. Mrs. Cross, she whispered. I'm here, sweetie. You're going to be okay. Over the next 2 days, they dosed the sick children with medicine, rotated them by the fire for warmth, forced fluids down their throats. It was touch and go. Emma's fever spiked so high she started hallucinating, talking to people who weren't there. But Ruth's skill and the stolen medicine made the difference. On the 3rd day, Emma's fever broke. By the 4th, all 5 children were sitting up, weak but recovering. Evelyn found Caleb outside, his shirt off despite the cold, letting Ruth stitch up the bullet graze on his ribs. The wound was clean, shallow, but it would scar. You should have told me you were hit, Evelyn said. You had enough to worry about. She watched Ruth work, watched Caleb's jaw tighten against the pain but not make a sound. This man who drifted into her life a stranger, who carried violence in his past like a weight, had risked his life to save children who weren't his, who would never be his. Thank you, she said quietly. Don't thank me yet. We made Hale look like a fool, robbed him in his own house. He won't let that stand. Let him come. We beat him once. We'll beat him again. But Ruth paused in her stitching, looking up with eyes that had seen too much of life to be optimistic. Men like Hale don't fight fair when they're embarrassed. They fight dirty. You should prepare for that. She was right. The retaliation came not with guns, but with words. Marcus brought the news 5 days later, returning from one of his careful scouting trips to the valley edge where he could overhear conversations. They're saying you're a thief, he reported. Hale's telling everyone you broke into his house and stole medicine he was saving for the truly sick. Says you're a criminal, that you've got the children brainwashed, that you killed Tommy yourself to make the town look bad. Sarah threw a pot across the room. That's a lie. All of it. Of course it's a lie, Evelyn said calmly, but it's a useful lie. It makes Hale the victim and us the villains. And people want to believe it because it's easier than admitting they failed. So what do we do? Marcus asked. Evelyn thought about it, looking around the cabin at the 37 people depending on her. At the children who'd learned to shoot. At the elderly who'd found purpose. At Caleb, stitches fresh in his side, watching her with those steady eyes that had seen war and chose to stand with her anyway. We survive, she said. We keep doing exactly what we've been doing. We work, we prepare, we take care of each other, and we wait for Hale to make his real move, because he will. Men like that always do. The real move came 2 weeks later in a form Evelyn hadn't anticipated. She woke to find Caleb standing at the window, staring down at the valley with an expression she'd never seen before. Fear. What is it? She asked. Smoke. Too much of it, and it's not from chimneys. She looked. He was right. A massive column of black smoke rose from the center of town, too thick and dark to be from fireplaces. Something was burning, something big. They watched as the sun rose higher, and slowly the details became clear. The general store was on fire. The structure where the town kept its communal supplies, what little remained, was burning to the ground. Accident? Evelyn asked, though she already knew the answer. No, look at the people. They're not fighting the fire. They're just watching. Through Caleb's telescope, a military piece he'd kept from the war, Evelyn could see figures in the street, could see Barrett Hale standing at the front of a group, gesturing, speaking, could see the despair on the faces of those listening. He burned it himself, she realized. He destroyed the town's supplies. Why would he do that? To leave them with one choice, come up here and take ours. Evelyn felt ice in her veins. He's forcing their hand, making it so desperate that they have no option but to attack us. And when they do, he'll stand back and let the town take the blame while he waits to seize control of whatever's left. Henry had joined them at the window. The old carpenter's face was grim. That's evil, pure evil, condemning his own people to starvation just to get power. That's politics, Caleb corrected, and it's about to become war. Within hours, they could see movement in the town, people gathering, arguments breaking out. The smoke from the burned store hung over everything like a funeral shroud. Evelyn gathered everyone in the cabin. 37 faces looked to her, children, elderly, Caleb, all of them depending on her to have an answer. Hale's made his move, she said. He's destroyed the town's food supply. They'll be coming up here with everything they have. Not 40 men this time. Everyone who can walk. Women. Anyone strong enough to fight. They'll be desperate, and desperate people are the most dangerous kind. Can we hold against that many? Sarah asked. We can try. But if they're willing to die to take what we have, eventually they'll get through. Numbers always win. So we lose? Emma's small voice was shaking. No. Evelyn looked at each of them in turn. We changed the game. We stop defending and start attacking. Not with guns. With truth. She turned to Marcus. How many people in that town would listen if they knew Hale burned the store himself? How many would turn on him if they had proof? Marcus thought about it. My pa would. And he's not alone. There's maybe 20 families who hate Hale but are too scared to stand against him. Then we give them a reason to stand. We give them proof. Evelyn looked at Caleb. You said you saw Hale's men setting the fire? Through the telescope, yes. 2 of his hired hands. They lit it at multiple points. That's not an accident, that's arson. Then we tell the town. We go down there before they come up here. We force them to see what Hale really is. They'll kill you on sight, Ruth warned. After the robbery, after everything, they're not going to listen. They will if we bring the children. Evelyn let that sink in. The children they've been told we're holding hostage. The children they think are brainwashed. We let the children speak for themselves. Let them tell their parents the truth about what's been happening up here versus what Hale's been telling them. Sarah stood up. I'll go. I'll tell them. Marcus stood. Me too. One by one, every child old enough to speak stood. Even Emma, still weak from pneumonia, raised her hand. I want to help. Evelyn felt her throat tighten. These children had been through hell. They'd buried a friend. They'd fought their own parents. They'd learned to survive in ways no child should have to. And now they were volunteering to walk into the lion's den to save the people who'd abandoned them. "All right," she said, "then we do this together. All of us. We go down to that town and we end this." Caleb grabbed her arm. "You're sure about this? If it goes wrong, we were dead anyway. At least this way, we die fighting for something that matters." They prepared through the afternoon. Evelyn laid out the plan carefully. They would approach openly, hands visible, no weapons except Caleb's rifle for protection against wildlife. The children would speak first, tell their stories. Then Evelyn would confront Hale publicly, force him to explain the burned store in front of the whole town. It was risky. It was possibly suicidal, but it was also the only move that had a chance of ending this without more bloodshed. As the sun began its descent, 37 people walked down from the ridge toward Clements Ridge. Children and elderly, the broken and the rebuilt, united by survival and the fierce determination to reclaim something that had been stolen from them. Dignity. At the edge of town, they stopped. Evelyn could see people watching from windows, see the barricades that had been erected, see the weapons being readied. The town was preparing for war. She stepped forward, her voice carrying clear in the cold air. "We've come to talk. Just talk. Send someone to hear us out, or send everyone. But we're not leaving until you know the truth about what Barrett Hale has done." For a long moment, nothing happened. Then slowly doors began to open. People emerged, hungry, desperate, angry people with nothing left to lose. And Evelyn prepared to fight the most important battle of all. Not with bullets, with words. The crowd gathered slowly in the town square, drawn by curiosity and hunger, and the desperate hope that maybe, somehow, this confrontation would solve what months of suffering had failed to fix. Evelyn counted at least 60 people, maybe more emerging from buildings as word spread. Their faces were gaunt, eyes hollow with the particular emptiness that came from watching winter strip away everything you thought was certain. Sarah stepped forward first, her voice shaking but clear. "Ma? Pa? I know you're out there." A woman pushed through the crowd, tears already streaming down her weathered face. "Sarah, baby, come here, come home." "Not yet, Ma. Not until you hear what I have to say." Sarah's hands were clenched at her sides. "Mrs. Cross didn't kidnap us. She didn't brainwash us. She fed us when you couldn't. She taught us how to work, how to survive, how to stand on our own feet. And she never asked for anything except that we earn what we ate." "She turned you against your own family," a man shouted from the back. "No, sir, she showed us what family is supposed to be. It's not just blood. It's keeping each other alive. It's working together. It's not letting children starve while grown men fight over who gets to be in charge." Sarah's voice grew stronger. "We stayed on that ridge because up there people do the hard things. They prepare. They sacrifice. They don't wait for someone else to save them." Marcus stepped up beside her. "My pa is in this crowd. I know he is. And I want him to hear this from me directly." He scanned the faces until he found his father, a lean man with shame written across his features. "You came up that ridge to steal from a woman who spent all summer working while you called her crazy. You brought a gun to her door. And when we defended ourselves, when we chose to stay with someone who actually kept us safe, you called it betrayal." His father started to speak, but Marcus cut him off. "I'm not finished. Tommy Brennan died because desperate men couldn't control themselves. He was 8 years old, Pa. 8. And he bled out in the snow because you and Ned Carver and all the others thought taking was easier than building." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Some looked ashamed, others defensive. But they were listening. One by one, the children spoke. They told stories of learning to preserve food, of discovering they were stronger than they'd believed, of finding purpose in work. They described the warmth of the cabin, the elderly folks who'd taught them skills, the sense of belonging that came from contributing rather than just consuming. Each testimony was a small knife cutting into the narrative Barrett Hale had constructed. When the last child finished, Evelyn stepped forward. The crowd tensed. Some hands moved toward weapons, but Mayor Thornton raised his hand and the movement stopped. "Say your piece, Mrs. Cross," Thornton called. "We're listening." "5 years ago, I lost my husband to winter," Evelyn began, her voice carrying across the square. He died because we weren't prepared. Because I trusted that things would work out, that help would come, that somehow we'd be fine. I learned the hardest lesson there is. The world doesn't care if you're ready. It comes anyway. She paused, meeting eyes in the crowd. So I prepared. I spent 5 years making sure I'd never be that helpless again. I dried food, I stored supplies, I did the work that hurt, that made me tired, that took every spare moment I had. And yes, I tried to warn you. I told Martha Hadley at the store. I mentioned the signs to anyone who'd listen. You called me broken, crazy. You laughed. We didn't know, someone shouted. You didn't want to know, Evelyn corrected. Because knowing would have meant changing, working harder, giving up comfort for security. And that's not a criticism. It's human nature. We all want to believe the easy season will last forever. But it doesn't. It never does. She gestured to the children standing with her. When the landslide cut you off and panic set in, I could have turned everyone away. I could have hoarded what I had and watched you starve. Instead, I fed your children. I took in your elderly. I shared what I'd earned through sweat and sacrifice, and I asked only that they work for it, that they contribute. Is that really such a terrible thing? You stole from Barrett Hale, a woman called out. Broke into his home like a common thief. I took medicine to save dying children, Evelyn shot back. Medicine he was hoarding while Emma and 4 others coughed their lungs out with pneumonia. And I'd do it again. I'd steal 1,000 times over before I'd let a child die because a rich man wanted to keep his private supply intact. Barrett Hale pushed through the crowd then, his face red with fury but his voice controlled, calculated. You see how she twists things? Makes herself the hero and me the villain? I've been trying to hold this town together while she sits on that ridge like a queen deciding who deserves to eat and who doesn't. You burned the general's store, Evelyn said flatly. The crowd went silent. Every eye turned to Hale. That's a lie, he said, but something flickered in his expression. The fire was an accident, faulty chimney, everyone knows that. I saw your men set it, Caleb called out, his voice cold. Through a telescope from the ridge. 2 of your hired hands, the big one with the scar and the younger one with red hair. They lit it at 4 different points at dawn 2 days ago. That's not a faulty chimney, that's arson. Hale's face went from red to purple. You're lying. You're both liars trying to turn people against me because I see through your manipulation. Then explain this, Marcus said, stepping forward again. Why did the fire start right after you called that town meeting? The one where you said the only solution was to take the ridge by force? Seems mighty convenient that right when you needed people desperate enough to attack Mrs. Cross, the last of the communal supplies burn up. The crowd was shifting now, voices rising in confusion and anger. People were looking at Hale with new suspicion. Someone shouted a question about the timing. Someone else demanded to know where his hired hands were right now. Hale tried to regain control. I've done nothing but try to save you people. I've organized rationing, set up work details, tried to maintain order while that woman up there plays savior with stolen food and kidnapped children. The children aren't kidnapped, Sarah's mother said, her voice breaking. I can see that now. Look at her. Look at all of them. They're healthy, fed, they stand straight. My Sarah looks stronger than she's been in months. She turned to Hale, tears running down her face. What have you given us except promises and empty stomachs? Everything I own, Hale roared. I've opened my resources. You've got a warm house while we freeze, a man interrupted. It was Marcus's father, finally finding his voice. You've got a full pantry while our children went hungry. And when this woman offered to help, you convinced us she was the enemy. Why? What do you gain if we all starve? Control, Evelyn answered. If everyone depends on him to survive, he owns you. He owns your debts, your land, your future. When spring comes and the supply wagons return, who do you think will be positioned to decide how things are distributed? Who will be the big man who saved the town? Not the people who actually did the work. Him. Always him. Hale's composure cracked. You have no right to speak to these people about control. You're the one who set yourself up as some kind of frontier queen, deciding who's worthy of your charity. It's not charity, Evelyn's voice cut like a blade. It's exchange. Work for food. Contribution for shelter. I never asked anyone to bow. I asked them to participate, to be useful, to remember that survival is something you build, not something you're owed. And what about those who can't work? Hale demanded. What about the truly weak? You'd let them die? The elderly on my ridge would disagree with you. Every single one of them works within their ability. Ruth teaches sewing, Henry repairs what breaks. Even those who can barely walk sort supplies, tend fires, do what they can. Because work isn't about strength, it's about dignity. It's about mattering. Evelyn stepped closer to him, her voice dropping but somehow carrying further. You want to know the difference between us, Hale? I see people as capable. You see them as resources to manage. I teach them to survive. You teach them to depend. And when spring comes, my people will stand on their own feet. Yours will still be on their knees, waiting for you to tell them what to do next. The crowd was fracturing now. Arguments breaking out. Some defending Hale. Others questioning him. Mayor Thornton tried to restore order, but the dam had broken. Too many months of suffering. Too many lies. Too much desperation coming to a head in the winter square. Then a new voice cut through the chaos. The store fire weren't no accident. Everyone turned. An old man stepped forward, weathered and bent, but with eyes sharp as winter. Name's Coleman. I worked as Hale's stable hand for 10 years. Fired me last month when I asked for warmer blankets for the horses. I was sleeping in the livery across from the store when it burned. I saw Hale's boys do it, saw them plain as day. They had torches, lit the place systematic-like. Then they stood back and watched it burn before riding off toward Hale's ranch. Hale's face drained of color. Coleman's a drunk and a liar. He's been trying to get back at me for months. I don't drink, Coleman said simply. Can't afford it, but I can see just fine. And I saw what I saw. The crowd turned on Hale like a wave, people shouting, demanding answers, pressing forward. His hired hands, the ones who'd been standing at the edges of the crowd, backed away slowly, then turned and ran. Hale stood alone, surrounded by the people he'd manipulated, and for the first time Evelyn saw real fear in his eyes. You destroyed our last supplies, a woman said, her voice shaking. You burned what could have kept our children alive. Why? Why would you do that? I didn't. This is all a misunderstanding. Answer her, Marcus's father roared. You've got 10 seconds to explain yourself before I drag you to answer for it properly. Hale looked around wildly, searching for support, finding none. His carefully constructed authority crumbled like wet paper. You're all fools, he spat finally. You deserve to starve. You're weak, pathetic, waiting for someone else to solve your problems. I was trying to teach you self-reliance. By burning our food? Thornton's voice was ice. By pitting us against each other? By trying to make us attack a woman who was actually helping? She's not helping. She's hoarding. There's enough on that ridge to feed the whole town, and she's keeping it for herself and her little cult of followers. Hale's composure was completely gone now, his true contempt for the townspeople spilling out. You're all sheep. You've always been sheep, and someone needs to lead sheep or they wander off cliffs. The crowd surged forward. Evelyn saw what was about to happen. Mob justice, brutal and swift. Part of her wanted to let it happen. Hale deserved it. He'd killed Tommy as surely as if he'd pulled the trigger himself. He'd burned their supplies. He'd manipulated them into fighting each other while he preserved his own comfort. But another part, the part that had learned hard lessons about what you could and couldn't live with, knew that watching a mob tear a man apart would haunt these people, would twist them into something ugly that winter couldn't excuse. Stop, she called out. The crowd hesitated, looking to her in confusion. Don't give him what he wants, Evelyn said. Don't become the violence he's been describing. You're better than that. He deserves to hang, someone shouted. Maybe, but not today. Not like this. Evelyn looked at Thornton. You're the mayor. The law. You deal with him legally, properly. Show your children that even when people betray you, you don't abandon justice for revenge. Thornton nodded slowly. You're right. He gestured to several men. Take Hale to the jail. Lock him up. We'll convene a proper trial when we have the luxury of time. As the men grabbed Hale, he struggled, shouting, You're making a mistake. Without me, you're nothing. You'll all die in the spring when you need someone who knows how to negotiate with the suppliers. We'll manage, Thornton said quietly. Somehow, we always do. They dragged Hale away, his protests fading into the distance. The crowd stood in stunned silence, processing what had just happened. Their leader, their self-appointed savior, revealed as the architect of their suffering. Finally, Marcus's father spoke up. Mrs. Cross, what happens now? Evelyn looked at the faces surrounding her, hungry, desperate, lost. They wanted her to solve this, to wave her hand and make everything better. But she couldn't. She'd prepared for herself and taken in those who came to her door. She'd never intended to save a whole town. Now you have a choice, she said carefully. You can come up to the ridge. Not all of you. I don't have supplies for that. But we can take some. The weakest, the sickest, the children who aren't already there. And everyone who comes works. No exceptions. No special treatment. You earn what you eat. What about the rest of us? A woman asked. You survive the way people have always survived winter. You ration what you have. You burn furniture if you have to. You hunt, trap, melt snow for water. You do the hard things. Evelyn's voice was firm but not unkind. And most importantly, you prepare for next time, because there will be a next time. Maybe not next winter, maybe not for years, but eventually comfort ends, and when it does, you need to be ready. Will you teach us? Sarah's mother asked. Come spring, when things ease up, will you teach us how to prepare like you did? Evelyn hadn't expected that. She looked at Caleb, who gave a small nod, looked at the children, who were watching her with hope, looked at Ruth and Henry and the other elderly folks who'd found purpose on her ridge. Yes, she said finally, if you'll listen, if you'll actually do the work. I'll teach you everything I know. The crowd began to disperse, people talking in small groups, processing everything. Some approached Evelyn directly, asking about coming to the ridge. Others hung back, pride or fear keeping them distant. Thornton stayed close, his expression troubled. You've changed the balance of power in this town, he said quietly. Hale was corrupt, but he held things together in his own twisted way. Now that he's gone, there's a vacuum. Fill it yourself, Evelyn suggested. You're the mayor. Actually lead instead of letting someone else pull strings. I'm not strong enough. Neither was I 5 years ago. You get strong by doing hard things repeatedly until they stop being hard. Start with the basics. Organize what food's left. Set up real rationing, fair rationing. Get people working on projects that matter, and stop waiting for someone to save you. Thornton nodded slowly. You could do it better. People would follow you. I'm not interested in leading a town. I'm interested in surviving and helping others who are willing to help themselves. There's a difference. Evelyn gestured to the ridge above. I've got 37 people depending on me already. That's enough. As they prepared to return to the ridge, taking 12 more people with them, 8 children and 4 adults who were genuinely too weak to survive on their own, Sarah's mother approached. Can I talk to her? She asked Evelyn, gesturing to Sarah. Private-like? Evelyn nodded and stepped away, giving them space. She watched mother and daughter embrace, saw Sarah crying, saw her mother crying harder, heard fragments of apology, of explanation, of love trying to bridge the gap that winter had created. After a long moment, Sarah pulled back. I'm staying on the ridge, Ma, at least through winter, maybe longer. Her mother's face crumpled. I understand. I do. Just be safe. Be strong. And know I'm proud of you. Even if I failed you, I'm proud of who you've become. You didn't fail me. You just got lost for a while. Now you know the way back. They embraced again, and Evelyn had to look away, her own throat tight with emotion. This was what winter did. It broke things apart so they could be rebuilt stronger. Or it broke them entirely. Time would tell which this was. The journey back up to the ridge was slow. The new arrivals were weak, struggling through snow that hadn't gotten any shallower. But the children who'd lived on the ridge for months helped them, offered arms to lean on, shared their strength. They'd learned what survival meant. Now they were teaching others. When they finally reached the cabin, Evelyn stood on the porch and looked down at Clement's ridge below. Smoke still rose from where the general store had been. The town looked smaller somehow, diminished. But there was movement in the streets now. People working together to clear snow. Organizing. Beginning the hard process of recovery. Ruth came to stand beside her. You gave them something today? More than food or medicine. What's that? Truth, direction. The understanding that they're not helpless victims. That's worth more than any amount of supplies. Will it be enough? For some, others will fall back into old patterns come spring, But some will remember, some will change. That's all you can hope for. Inside the cabin, now housing 49 people in a space meant for one family, Caleb was organizing sleeping arrangements and work shifts with military efficiency. The new arrivals were already being given tasks. Simple things to start, building up their strength and confidence. Emma was showing a younger girl how to sort dried beans. Marcus was teaching one of the new boys how to chop kindling properly. The transformation from desperate refugees to contributing members was already beginning. That's what work did. It gave people purpose, made them feel valued, turned shame into pride. That night, after everyone had been fed and settled, Evelyn sat with Caleb by the fire. Her body ached from the long day, from the confrontation, from the weight of responsibility that never seemed to get lighter. "You did good today," Caleb said quietly. "Stopped a lynching, gave people hope, exposed the real enemy. It's not over. Hale's locked up, but there are others like him. People who see crisis as opportunity. And winter's not done yet. We've still got months to go. But we'll make it. You know we will." Evelyn looked at him, this man who'd shown up a stranger and become essential. "How can you be sure?" "Because I've seen what you're capable of. You prepare for the worst and fight like hell when it arrives. That's a winning combination." "And what about after winter? When spring comes and the supply wagons return and everything goes back to normal?" Caleb was quiet for a moment. "Does it go back to normal? Can it, after this?" "I don't know. Maybe for some, but not for us. Not for the people on this ridge." Evelyn stared into the fire, watching flames consume wood the way winter consumed the unprepared. "We've built something here, something that doesn't fit into the old way of doing things. And I'm not sure I want to give it up just because the crisis passes." "Then don't. Keep going. Expand. Show them there's another way to live." "You make it sound easy." "It won't be. But nothing worth doing ever is." He looked at her with those steady eyes that had seen war and chose peace. "Whatever you decide to build here, I'll help. For as long as you'll have me." Evelyn felt something warm spread through her chest. Not love, not yet, but the possibility of it. The understanding that loneliness wasn't a permanent state. That partnership could be built on mutual respect and shared purpose rather than romantic fantasy. "I'll hold you to that," she said softly. Outside, snow began to fall again. But inside the cabin, 49 people slept warm and fed. They'd survived another day. Tomorrow they'd survive another. And the day after that, and the day after that, building strength and skill and the kind of resilience that couldn't be taught, only earned through repeated confrontation with hardship. Winter still ruled the Montana Valley, but on the ridge above, in a cabin that had become a fortress, that had become a community, its grip was beginning to weaken. Not because the weather changed, but because the people inside refused to be defeated by it. They'd learned the lesson Evelyn had spent 5 years teaching herself. Survival wasn't something that happened to you. It was something you chose every single day through work and sacrifice, and the refusal to give up even when giving up would be easier. And now, with Hale's corruption exposed and the town beginning to wake up to its own responsibility, spring didn't just mean the return of warmth. It meant the possibility of rebuilding not just buildings and supplies, but the very idea of what community could be. If they could hold on. If they could make it through these final months. If winter, in its cruelty, had taught them enough before it finally let go. The hardest part of winter came in February, when the cold settled into bones and refused to leave, when the monotony of survival became its own kind of torture. 49 people crammed into spaces meant for one family created friction that no amount of preparation could prevent. Arguments over sleeping space, tensions about who worked hardest, the slow erosion of patience that came from never being alone, never having silence, never escaping the constant press of bodies and breath and need. Evelyn woke one morning to find 2 of the older boys fighting over a wool blanket, fists flying, blood on the floor. She separated them with a fury that surprised even her, dragging them outside into the snow in nothing but their nightshirts. "You want to fight?" she shouted. "Fine. Fight out here where the cold can teach you what real problems feel like. When you're ready to remember that we survive together or die apart, you can come back inside." She left them there, shivering and shocked, for 5 minutes. Long enough to hurt, but not long enough to cause real damage. When she brought them back in, they were crying from the cold, teeth chattering, all fight gone. "We're family now," she told them, told everyone watching. "Not by blood, but by choice. And family doesn't tear itself apart over blankets. We've come too far to fail because we couldn't control our tempers. Understood?" 49 voices murmured agreement, but Evelyn could see the strain in their faces, could feel her own patience wearing thin. February was the month that broke people, the month when spring felt like a lie you told yourself to get through one more frozen dawn. She found Caleb that evening checking the dwindling supplies in the main cellar. His face was grim. "How long?" she asked. 6 weeks if we ration heavy, 8 if we cut back more than we already have." "And spring?" "Not for 10 weeks, maybe 12. He looked at her. "We're short, Evelyn. We prepared well, but we're feeding 3 times the people you planned for. The math doesn't work." Evelyn leaned against the cellar wall, feeling the cold seep through her coat. She'd known this was coming, had seen it in the inventory numbers weeks ago, but kept hoping something would change, that the town would find hidden supplies, that the weather would break early, that somehow the impossible math would balance. "We could send people back down," Caleb suggested quietly. "The ones who came last. They're stronger now. They might make it." "To what? The town's in worse shape than we are. At least here we've got organization, discipline. Down there, it's chaos." Evelyn closed her eyes. "Sending them back is a death sentence, and you know it." "So what do we do?" "We hunt, we trap, we melt snow and make it stretch. And we pray." She caught herself, remembering her promise to avoid that word. "We hope that we're stronger than the hunger when it really sets in." Over the next week, Caleb and the older boys set trap lines in the surrounding forest. They caught rabbits, a few squirrels, once a deer that provided meat for 3 days. But it wasn't enough. The portions at meals grew smaller. The children stopped complaining about being hungry because everyone was hungry. Hunger became the baseline, the constant background noise of existence. Ruth started teaching classes to distract from the emptiness in their stomachs. She showed the younger children how to make rag dolls from scraps, how to tell stories that didn't require anything but imagination. Henry carved small toys from wood, gave them to kids who'd stopped playing weeks ago. The elderly became the village memory keepers, preserving something human in the face of starvation. Then, on a bitter morning in late February, Marcus came running into the cabin, breathless with excitement. "There's someone coming up the trail. Multiple people!" Everyone tensed. After Hale's arrest, the town had left them alone, but trust was fragile. Evelyn grabbed her rifle and went outside, Caleb at her side. What she saw made her lower the weapon slowly. A group of townspeople climbing the ridge, maybe 15 of them, led by Mayor Thornton. But they weren't carrying weapons. They were carrying bundles, pulling a sled loaded with supplies. Thornton stopped at the property line, breathing hard from the climb. "Mrs. Cross, we come in peace, and with offerings." "What kind of offerings?" "Food. What we could spare. It's not much. Maybe 3 weeks' worth for your people if you ration it, but it's what we can give." Evelyn stared at the sled, at the bags and bundles, feeling something crack in her chest. "Why? You barely have enough for yourselves." "Because you saved us," a woman said, stepping forward. It was Sarah's mother. "When you exposed Hale, when you showed us what real leadership looks like, you gave us the courage to organize. We started rationing properly, hunting cooperatively, sharing resources. We've been doing what you do, working together instead of fighting each other. And we've made it work better than we thought possible." Another man spoke up, Marcus's father. "My son is up here because you taught him to be strong. You taught all our children that survival is something you earn. The least we can do is help you survive too." Thornton nodded. "We took a vote. Everyone who could spare something gave. Some gave more than they should have, honestly. But they wanted you to know that we haven't forgotten what you did for us." Evelyn felt tears threatening and fought them back. She'd spent 5 years building walls, protecting herself, trusting only her own preparation. And now these people, these same people who'd mocked her, attacked her, called her crazy, were saving her life. "Thank you," she managed. "This means—" "You can't know what this means." "We know exactly what it means," Sarah's mother said. "It means we're learning, finally learning what you tried to teach us all along." They unloaded the supplies, refused to stay for a meal even though Evelyn offered. "You need it more than we do," Thornton said. "Besides, we should get back before dark." "But Mrs. Cross, when spring comes, we want you to keep your promise. Teach us to prepare. Teach us to be ready for the next time. Because there will be a next time." "I'll teach you everything I know," Evelyn promised. After they left, Evelyn and Caleb stood looking at the supplies: dried beans, smoked meat, cornmeal, even some preserved vegetables. Combined with what they had left and careful rationing, it was enough. Enough to make it to spring. "We're going to survive," Caleb said, something like wonder in his voice. "We're going to do more than survive," Evelyn corrected. "We're going to change how this whole valley thinks about winter." The supplies from town bought them breathing room, but the final month of winter still tested them. March came with late storms that buried the valley under fresh snow just when everyone thought the worst was over. But this time, when the winds howled and the temperatures dropped, the people on the ridge knew they'd make it. They'd faced worse. They'd overcome worse. This was just winter being winter, one last display of power before surrendering to spring. During those final weeks, something shifted in the cabin. The strain eased. People who'd been short-tempered found patience. Children who'd been scared found courage. The elderly who'd felt useless found purpose. They weren't just surviving anymore. They were thriving in ways that had nothing to do with full bellies or warm fires. Emma, fully recovered from her pneumonia, started teaching the younger children their letters using charcoal on flat pieces of wood. Sarah organized a system for mending clothes that would have impressed any quartermaster. Marcus and James built a better smoke-curing rack that they planned to replicate for the town come spring. Even Ruth and Henry, both of whom had seemed ancient and fragile when they first arrived, moved with new energy, their skills valued, their knowledge essential. Evelyn watched it all with quiet amazement. She'd set out to survive alone and ended up building a family. Not the family she'd imagined when Thomas was alive. There would be no children of her blood, no continuation of her direct line. But this was family nonetheless. Chosen family. Built family. The kind that formed when people faced death together and decided to live instead. One evening, as Caleb sat repairing a harness by firelight, Evelyn joined him with her own mending. They worked in comfortable silence for a while before he spoke. "What are you going to do when this is over? When everyone goes back to their own lives?" "I don't think everyone will go back," Evelyn said thoughtfully. "Some will. Sarah's mother wants her home. Marcus's father is building a case to convince Marcus to return. But others? They found something here they didn't have before." "And you? What have you found?" Evelyn looked around the crowded cabin, at the faces illuminated by firelight, at the community she'd accidentally created. "I found that preparing for the worst doesn't mean you can't hope for the best. That survival doesn't have to be solitary. That maybe the reason Thomas and I never had children was because I was meant to mother differently. Not through birth, but through teaching. Through showing people they're stronger than they believe." Caleb set down his work and looked at her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "And me? Where do I fit in your future? Where do you want to fit?" "I came here running from my past," he said slowly, "from violence I'd done, from the man I'd been. But somewhere along the way, I stopped running. I found a reason to stay. Found a woman who saw my skills not as weapons, but as tools for protection, for building, for something better than war." "Caleb, I'm saying I want to stay, Evelyn, not as your hired hand, as your partner, in this work, in this life, in whatever comes next." Evelyn felt her heart hammering. She'd loved Thomas, would always carry that love like a scar. But this was different. This was two damaged people who'd found each other in the ruins and decided to build something new from the wreckage. "I'd like that," she said quietly. "I'd like that very much." He smiled, rare and genuine, and reached for her hand. Around them, the cabin buzzed with life. Children playing quiet games, elderly folks telling stories, the constant hum of people living. No one noticed the moment passing between Evelyn and Caleb. It was too small, too personal, overshadowed by the larger drama of survival. But it mattered. It mattered more than storms or food supplies or any of winter's trials. It was two people choosing each other, choosing hope, choosing to believe that the future could be better than the past. The first real sign of spring came in mid-March. Evelyn woke to the sound of dripping, snow melting off the roof, hitting the ground in rhythmic drops that sounded like a promise being kept. She went outside into air that was still cold but no longer brutal, and saw it. Green. Just the tiniest hints of it where the snow had pulled back from southern exposures. The earth remembering how to live. Within days, the transformation accelerated. The snowpack began its retreat. The creek, frozen solid for months, cracked and flowed. Birds returned, their calls breaking the winter silence. And down in the valley, Clements Ridge stirred like something waking from a long, troubled sleep. The first supply wagon made it through in early April. Evelyn watched from her ridge as the town gathered to meet it, heard the distant sounds of celebration. Relief. The connection to the outside world had been restored. Winter's siege was over. People started leaving the cabin gradually, returning to whatever homes and lives they'd left behind. Some went eagerly, ready to reclaim their independence. Others went reluctantly, looking back at the ridge like they were leaving something precious. Sarah was torn. Her mother wanted her home, and the girl loved her family. But she'd changed on the ridge, grown into someone stronger and more capable than the 14-year-old who'd arrived months ago. "You can always come back," Evelyn told her. "This place isn't going anywhere, and you're always welcome here. Will you really teach the town, like you promised?" "I will, starting this summer. I'll show anyone who wants to learn how to prepare, how to preserve, how to be ready. And you can help me if you want." Sarah hugged her fiercely. I want to learn everything you know and then teach others. So what happened this winter never happens again." Marcus stayed. So did 3 other children whose parents either didn't want them back or who died during the winter. So did Ruth and Henry, and 2 other elderly folks who'd found more life on the ridge than they'd had in years. The cabin population settled at 12, a number Evelyn could manage, could sustain, could build with. In late April, Mayor Thornton made the climb to the ridge with a proposal. The town wanted to officially recognize what Evelyn had done, wanted to grant her land and resources, wanted to make her survival school an official institution. "We're calling it the Cross Preparedness Academy," Thornton explained. "You teach people how to survive. We send students, provide supplies, support the work. It becomes a permanent resource for the whole valley." Evelyn looked at Caleb, who nodded, looked at the children who'd stayed, who needed structure and purpose, looked at Ruth and Henry, whose teaching had proven invaluable. "I'll do it," she said, "but on my terms. No one gets in who isn't willing to work. No special privileges for the rich or well-connected. And we maintain independence from town politics. I won't be anyone's puppet." "Agreed. We learned our lesson about corrupt leadership." Thornton extended his hand. "Thank you, Mrs. Cross. You saved us. Not just from starvation, from ourselves." As spring deepened into summer, the ridge transformed again. Evelyn and Caleb expanded the cabin, adding structures for students, for storage, for teaching. They built new drying racks, expanded the root cellars, created demonstration gardens showing different preservation methods. The older children helped with construction, learning carpentry and planning, and the satisfaction of building something permanent. The first class started in June, 20 adults from the valley, eager to learn. Evelyn taught them everything. How to read weather signs, how to preserve food, how to calculate supplies for winter, how to maintain discipline when comfort was scarce. She didn't make it easy, didn't coddle, but she made it real. And people learned. By summer's end, drying racks appeared in yards throughout Clements Ridge. Root cellars were dug and stocked. Families practiced rationing when times were good, so they'd be ready when times were hard. The valley was changing, rebuilding not just buildings, but mindsets. Barrett Hale remained in jail through the spring, awaiting trial. When it finally came in July, the verdict was swift and unanimous. Guilty of arson, conspiracy, and reckless endangerment. He was sentenced to 5 years in territorial prison and stripped of all property and standing in the community. As they led him away, Hale caught sight of Evelyn in the courtroom, his face twisted with hatred. "This is your fault," he spat. "You poisoned them against me, turned them into your followers." "I taught them to think for themselves," Evelyn corrected calmly. "That's the opposite of making followers. But you wouldn't understand that. You only know how to rule, not how to lead." He was still shouting as they took him away, but his words had no power anymore. The people of Clements Ridge had learned to recognize manipulation. had learned the difference between someone who used them and someone who empowered them. In August, on the anniversary of the day she'd met Caleb, Evelyn stood on her ridge looking down at the valley. Smoke rose from chimneys, but different smoke now, from households that were prepared, that had wood stocked, that wouldn't panic when winter returned. Gardens sprawled green and productive. New root cellars dotted the landscape. The valley had learned. Caleb came to stand beside her, his arms slipping around her waist with the comfortable familiarity of partners who'd survived hell together. "Thinking about winter?" he asked. "Always thinking about winter. It's in my bones now. The understanding that comfort is temporary, that hard times will come again. But we'll be ready." "We'll be ready," she agreed. "And so will they." Below in the town, she could see Sarah helping her mother set up drying racks in their yard. Saw Marcus teaching younger children how to split wood properly. Saw former students of the academy sharing knowledge with neighbors, the lessons spreading like ripples across water. This was the real victory, Evelyn realized. Not surviving one terrible winter, but changing how an entire community thought about survival. Creating a culture of preparation that would outlast her, that would protect generations not yet born. Tommy Brennan's grave sat on a small rise near the cabin, marked with a simple wooden cross that Henry had carved. Evelyn visited it often, spoke to the boy who'd paid the price for adult failures, promised him that his death had meant something, that it had been the catalyst for change. "We didn't let you die for nothing," she whispered, kneeling by the grave as summer flowers bloomed around it. "We built something from that terrible morning, something that will keep other children safe." That evening, the whole Ridge community gathered for dinner outside. 12 people who'd become a family, eating food they'd grown and preserved together, telling stories under a sky that had forgotten how to freeze. Emma sat in Evelyn's lap, drawing pictures in a proper notebook that the town had gifted her. Ruth and Henry argued good-naturedly about the best way to cure bacon. Marcus and James planned next winter's woodcutting schedule with the enthusiasm of boys who'd learned that work was worthy. Caleb raised his cup of cider, calling for attention. "To Evelyn Cross," he said, "who prepared for the worst and saved us all." "To preparation," Evelyn corrected, raising her own cup. "To facing hard truths. To working when it's easier to wait. To building when it's easier to borrow. To the understanding that survival is something you create, every single day, through choices that hurt but keep you alive." "To survival!" they chorused and drank. As the sun set over the Montana Valley, painting the sky in shades of amber and gold, Evelyn felt something she hadn't felt in 5 years. Peace. Not the fragile peace of false security, but the deep peace that came from knowing you'd faced your worst fears and overcome them. From knowing that when winter came again, and it would come again, you wouldn't face it alone or unprepared. The Ridge had started as one widow's desperate attempt to survive grief and weather. It had become a fortress, then a refuge, then a school, and finally, a promise. A promise that the valley would never again be caught unprepared, that children would never again go hungry while adults fought over scraps, that the hard lessons of one terrible winter would echo through generations, keeping them safe. When the first snow fell the following October, it found a valley transformed. Every household had supplies. Every family had plans. Drying racks stood ready. Root cellars overflowed. Woodpiles towered high. And on the ridge above Clements Ridge, in a cabin that had been expanded into a small campus, Evelyn Cross stood with her partner, Caleb Rourke, and 12 people who'd become family, watching the snow fall without fear. "Here it comes," Caleb said. "Here it comes," Evelyn agreed, "and we're ready." The snow fell soft and white and beautiful. No longer an enemy, but simply a season. Winter had taught the valley its lesson. Now the valley was teaching winter right back. That preparation defeats panic, that community defeats isolation, that the human capacity to adapt and overcome was stronger than any storm. On the ridge, smoke rose from chimneys feeding fires that wouldn't go out. In the valley below, smoke rose from 100 households that had learned the same lesson. And somewhere between them, in the space where preparation met determination, where fear had been transformed into strength, the ghost of Tommy Brennan rested easy. His death had bought wisdom. His sacrifice had purchased survival for generations. And the woman who'd promised to make his loss meaningful had kept that promise with every child she taught, every adult she trained, every winter she helped the valley survive. Spring would come again, it always did. But now when it arrived, it would find a people who hadn't just endured winter, they'd mastered it. And that made all the difference.